Welcome back, friends, to the Global Glory Chasers podcast. Today, we are inviting you to join us for an adventure feasting on the glory of God. And in this season, I have been hosting conversations with artists, chefs, authors, teachers, and we have been delving into a few of my favorite topics, which is food, books, and travel, and how that impacts our faith and our experience of God. And so if you are interested in seeing the Imago Dei, the image of God in the people and the cultures of the world, these conversations were designed for you. And I'm very excited that today in the studio with me, I have my dear friend, Krista Gilbert. She is a former interior designer turned life designer who is committed to coaching you towards living a life that you love. And she also is a podcaster. She's a speaker. She's a retreat leader. She calls herself also a mindset teacher, which I know comes into her coaching. She's a traditions keeper and a people celebrator. And she lives in the Pacific Northwest. She's a mama of 4, and she's a self-taught cook. She and I have had the privilege of helping to host retreats together. And she is a mastermind behind the Open Door Sisterhood, along with Alex Kirkendall. So we've talked about that a little bit on the podcast, especially in last episode where I introduced you all to my new friend, Chrissy, who was on the last retreat. And Krista is also passionate about writing a compelling, significant, and adventurous story with her life. And we're going to ask her a little bit more about that as we have this conversation today. Krista, thanks for coming. And please introduce yourself. Let us know a little bit more about this season of life that you're in.
So happy to be here, Dorina. And I just love that you and I share we actually share a lot of things in common, but one of those is travel and food and culture. And I'm so thankful to be here. And we find ourselves just having launched our youngest of 4 to college. So this is a new season for us. We are not calling it the empty nest. We're calling it base camp, where we're just sending kids out on their adventures and they can come back and refuel and rest and whatever they need. But we're also having some adventures of our own. So that's where we find ourselves at the moment.
I love that. I'm so glad you mentioned base camp because I love following you on Instagram and even just hearing from you through your podcasts. And I feel like you're just a few years ahead of me. So I'm learning. It's like, I don't want to call it empty nesting either. So what can we come up with? And base camp makes so much sense to me because I do feel like it's a hub. And so it's interesting, that's what you're shaping in this new season as you've just launched your youngest to college. I want our listeners to get to know your family a little bit more. And I wonder if you could tell us just about your cultural heritage. What is that family mix that you have with your husband and your kids?
Well, like I said, we have 4 kids, and we both come from the Pacific Northwest. So my husband's family is actually partly Norwegian. So they are 2 generations removed from full Norwegian immigrants. And my family, they are just a mix. But I really do see cultural heritage as not only our ancestry, but also what are those things that have been passed down, those traditions, those values, those places that have come to mean a lot to us. And for me, that really comes down to some things that my grandparents passed to me and my great aunts. They were people of family. They were very family oriented. So the Sunday pot roast and the potato salad on 4th of July. I mean, I still remember my grandma. It's one of my core memories, actually, is my grandma making potato salad on a wooden table that my grandpa had made at the lake cabin that you've been to. And, everyone just gathering around, playing cards and watching grandma make the potato salad. So food and family have always been really tied together for me, and food being an integral part of these family gatherings that we were a part of. And then faith, both of my sets of grandparents, but and particularly my mom's mom, my Grandma Jones, she was just an incredibly faithful woman, and her Bible was just highlighted and written on from front to back. And my mom actually gave it to me for Christmas last year, and it was
Oh,
like the
I love
greatest gift.
that.
It was so touching. I just couldn't believe she was giving that to me, that gift. But and my great aunt Emma, she was another strong woman of faith. And every time we go over there, she'd have Rice Krispie treats. So that was another food piece. But literally, we came to associate Aunt Emma with Rice Krispie treats and church. And so those were the two things. And I think that's pretty good. If I could be known for those two things with my grandkids, great. I'm happy. Love God, love Rice Krispie treats. So she was just faithful. I mean, she was the one sharpening the pencils in the pews. And I mean, who does that, right? Who is the person who does that? Aunt Emma does that. Great Aunt Emma. So, just a long, I think, heritage of faithfulness and focusing on things that matter. And that was definitely has been passed down, because that really is how then my parents, influenced who they became and then how they raised us. And so we see where that generational link happens.
I love that. And I think it's good because it highlights for us, when we talk about cultural heritage, it's not just about ethnicity, that there's so much that shapes that. You mentioned this lake house, and I know that there's even this culture around the lake, and people may not know what this is. I mean, I certainly did not know about it until I went there. And now that I've been there for 3 retreats, I even shared with you this year, it's like, it feels like my place. Like, it feels like one of my happy, peaceful places that is stored in my memories. And just, I have a certain feeling when I walk into that house. So tell us a little bit more about lake culture and where your lake house is, and kind of what shapes that community.
Yeah, it's got a great story. I mean, it's in northern Idaho, and it really was it's very close to Canada. So it's really far north on the panhandle of Idaho. And my grandparents bought the property back in 1957, and my grandma and my grandpa and my dad and my uncle and my aunt, they would camp up there in the summer, and they pulled down the logs and they built an A-frame from a 25-cent floor plan from Sunset Magazine that my grandma ordered. And that's I mean, talk about just a place that means something. I mean, that land has been so important to our family, and there's been now 3 generations raised on that property. And so it comes to represent more than the place. It represents my grandma, it represents my grandpa, it represents my cousins, and it represents this family, um, really just this family experience that we share. And the lake culture, I mean, I think about all the time how geography shapes us. I mean, I'm from the Pacific Northwest, and the Pacific Northwest, I mean, just like for you, you're from California, and there's a certain vibe that comes with Californians, right? Because of where you are raised near the ocean, that influences who you become. In the same way that when we're as a part of someone from the Pacific Northwest, I mean, mountains and water are literally woven into my fiber. I truly feel like I can't separate from them. It is so much a part of how I was raised. And so when we talk about lake culture, it is also part of the fiber around me, because this is where we feel at home. And many of the people that go to this lake where we go, they've been also there for generations. And so, again, you can't separate the people from the landscape. It all blends and it becomes a part of this fabric of your family story. And that's really just how it is. And so I think we can all say that the landscape that we're raised in becomes a part of that fabric. And that's a beautiful piece of the family heritage and story.
I love your family heritage, and just through the times when we've been to the lake house with you, even this most recent retreat that we went on together, that we learned about some of that history, and your grandparents building this home, and then even how that home is a place of blessing for your immediate family, for your extended family, the cousins, and even now the way that you use it as a place of hospitality to welcome women from all different families. It's a beautiful legacy. And it also kind of reminds me of why, for me, it is important also to travel. because I have this opportunity then to step into someone else's geography and story. And then I get to learn about their cultural heritage by going to their land, to going to their city, going to their place. Now, I know that world travel is something that's also really important to your family. And I want to hear more about that. Like what is travel for you? Why do you travel? And what are some of those memorable places that you have brought your family to?
It's such a big question, but it's one that I really feel deeply about. And again, my parents valued travel, and so then they passed that on. They encouraged me in college, study abroad, study abroad, study abroad. And I did, and that just opened up my world. And then from that point forward, it was just such a high value for me. So that even one exposure and some of them taking us to a few places growing up, then that set the wheel in motion. And when I think about why do I travel, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why we travel. One, it's fun and we really get to see new places. But it's more than that. I mean, one, it broadens our perspective. We get out of our bubble, and that is so critical in my opinion. Getting out of the norms and the place that is what we know, it challenges us and it expands us. Literally, it expands us, it expands our minds, it expands our hearts, and we also become so much more open to other people. And that is only a good thing. And there is nothing that can, it is only a benefit to us when we do that. And I would also say it bonds us relationally. And there's a great study that talks about how new experiences bond people, which is why they say, for example, in your marriage, keep having new experiences. Don't just sit down and watch the same movie or, in the same place every time, because it's actually when we are having new experiences together that we keep tying those bonds, those emotional bonds. And so I think the same is true when we travel. We're constantly having new experiences, and what that does is it bonds us with the people we're having those experiences with. It also shakes up our norm, because what happens is, and tell me if you think this is true in your life during it, but we go on autopilot, and our brains actually don't like to work very hard, and that's something I talk a lot about in coaching. So our brains go on autopilot, and we're just doing the same things, the same routine, and our senses are a little bit deadened. And so what happens when we travel is all of a sudden we are no longer in our place of safety and comfort. And so what happens is our senses wake up, and we're seeing new things, we're experiencing new things, we are tasting new things, and all of a sudden we are wide awake. And we feel like we're wide awake. We feel differently inside, because all of a sudden we are out of our comfort zone, out of our norm, and that essentially wakes us up. And that is so great when you get used to that. When travel becomes a part of what you do, you start to crave that. And it's not like we're just going for, those constant new experience after new experience. And I'm not saying that. It's just, again, it's that expansion that happens within us that makes us a more layered and textured person. And it makes us, I think, a deeper person. It makes us someone who understands the world differently. We are more compassionate, we're more kind, we're more open. And those are beautiful things to carry with us back into our everyday life.
I love the way that you articulated that. And I think it does resonate with my own experience too. I mean, I traveled when I was in college, I did study abroad, and I do believe that began to shape me. I mean, my parents always traveled with us. We did a lot of mountain traveling when I was a kid. So we did a lot of camping and national parks. Like that was our kind of cheap, but also very rich experience of the United States that my parents always brought us on. And so then when I realized, living in a different country, living in a different culture, like that actually began to help me expand my heart of mercy, my heart of compassion, like you mentioned. And later in life, my late husband, I've shared a bit of my story before. My first husband died of cancer, but when he and I started our nonprofit organization in Haiti, a lot of what we were doing was welcoming teams of people to come and work in Haiti, or to put on camps for kids, or even as kind of exposure trips for educators and leaders. And I got to see that become true in the people who would come, that we would host for those teams, and how transformative just even a week in another country and culture that was so different from theirs, and how even the Lord would use that to deepen their faith. So I do agree with you. There's this underlying foundation of why travel is important. And it's not just being an adventure junkie, although I know you and I are both all about adventure, but it's because there's something that happens within the fabric of who we are when we take that step to travel to a new place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could not agree more. And I think as we look at it through a lens of faith, we really can see that, because if we just live in our same place, in our same town, with the same people over and over again, God's world feels like those people, that town, that place. But when we travel, we get a more of a sense of God's greatness and of God's bigger story at play that is so much bigger than our little corner of the world. And we may love our little corner of the world, and that's beautiful. We should. And we also can value and appreciate that God has a much bigger story at play. It's a global story, and we don't quite have that image in our mind until we go out and see it.
Absolutely. Well, that is preaching my heart, because that's exactly what being a global glory chaser is all about. Yeah. And I want you to take us on a couple of these adventures with you, because you have been all over the world. What are a couple of those places that are just like, for you, these are the core memories, these are the mountaintop experiences, places that you've gotten to travel or live that you could share with our audience?
There's so many. I will camp for a second in Costa Rica, because I did live for a year in Costa Rica in my 20s. And I got to live in a rural village, and I lived with 4 generations of women in the same home in the coffee plantation area. So a lot of coffee pickers in our town. And it was a life-changing experience. I mean, it was very lonely. I did not speak Spanish well when I went, and I was fully immersed. There was not an English speaker for miles. This was before technology, so there were no phone. There was one phone in the whole village. So if my parents wanted to call me, they would yell through the village that my parents were calling. But it changed me. That time of loneliness, which we tend to avoid with everything in us, that actually drew me to Christ in a way that I hadn't been drawn to Christ up until that point. And so my faith deepened, and scripture became just water for my soul every day. And I would go running every day out in the coffee fields. And the great grandma in the house just thought that was the craziest thing that she'd ever heard, because there were snakes out there. It's very peligroso, she would say. I really spent time with myself and praying, and it just was so good in all ways. And so even though it was uncomfortable, I look back on that time and I would not trade it for the world. So Costa Rica, and eventually I did start to speak Spanish better. And, I got more comfortable there, and especially with the language. And so, what an incredible year. And then years later, I actually took my kids when they were young back down there. And I'll never forget, I got off the plane in San Jose, and it was the time my youngest still needed a car seat. And so I was by myself. My husband was going to meet us down a week later, but I was going to take the kids to language school, go see my host family. And I had, a car seat. I had bags. My kids had their backpacks on, and we're just tromping through the airport. And all of a sudden it opens up, and literally it was like whoosh, the warm wind, the humidity. And then all of a sudden, all these people swarming us, taxi, and my kids were just like, what is going on? Well, nobody came. We were supposed to meet our driver. Nobody came for 4 hours. Finally, at midnight, this guy comes running up the bank, and he's like, Gilbert. And so we're like, yeah, that we've been waiting here. We just decided to wait. So then we get in his car, and he drives us 2 hours to, up and down these big careening, just, I mean, the roads in Costa Rica are crazy. You've been there. And you're just up and down these hills. And we get to the place we're staying. And it's this garage. And it was through the language school. It's this garage, and there's a tin roof, and there's cots laid out inside. And so we get out, we gather around these cots, and there's the metal, and then the metal wall. Well, it's next door to a cantina. And so we get settled, the kids are on their cots, and all of a sudden, these drunk guys start pounding and yelling in Spanish, and they don't even know we're in there. They're just doing their thing next to this cantina. And all of a sudden, I see these tears just start rolling down my kids' faces. They are terrified. I mean, the kind of tears where they're not being dramatic. They're just terrified. So I literally I go, okay, it's like 2 a.m, 2:30 a.m. And I'm like, all right, everybody, cots in the middle. So we gathered our cots in the middle, and I said, everybody just hold hands, and I'm going to pray. And so we circled up, everybody held hands, and we prayed, and we just asked God to be with us. And they laid down and they went to sleep after that. And then I stayed up all night and was vigilant watching over my kids. And we ended up moving to a different place. It wasn't next to the cantina. But all this to say, right, like that, in that moment, I think anyone from the outside looking in would have said, you are crazy. You are crazy to take your kids there. You are crazy to arrive at 2 a.m. in this place with the cantina and the people pounding on the door. And yet I look back on that now, right? Because we're in this base camp season. And my kids look back on that now as one of the most formative experiences of their childhood. It built them. It made them who they became. And of course, we had a lot of other experiences in those 3 weeks that we were there. But that builds depth in us, and that does something in us. Okay, so that's my Costa Rica adventure. Love that so much.
I love that it's also, like you said, one of those formative memories for your kids. And now knowing like your kids are young adults, that they can look back on that. It's really powerful. I've had this conversation with my daughters too, because we spent a lot of time in Haiti, back and forth, and living in Haiti in the summers when they were little, when they were very young. And I felt like I had to navigate some of the judgment because people thought I was crazy bringing my kids there. Actually, Haiti's in a much worse situation today in 2024 than it was, when I started to bring my kids. So I will give that caveat. But I think about now how my girls can articulate those memories and the ways that God showed up and provided for our family, and how he met us in the darkness, and, the cots circled up. Like, what a vivid, I was getting chills when you were telling me about that, because I have my own version of that, and how even my daughter, who's a freshman in college, we were just talking about this last weekend when we were together, and just how her time in Haiti shaped her and the way that she sees the world. And even now, going away from home to college, she's 7 hours away from us, and what that experience has been like for her to live in a new place, which it actually hasn't been as hard because she has navigated so much of that in travel. Now, this is the first time she's away from me, so that's obviously different, but it was interesting for me to hear her articulate it as well. I love that your kids have that experience, and that you pushed through to do that, because it's risky, but the risk is also worth it because of how it shapes us.
Well, and I think there's so much fear that gets removed when we just show up to other places. I think before we go, there's a lot of fear. And this was back in the day when Costa Rica was not what it is today, right? So now it's more common for people to go there. Back then, it was not. I was and I was rural Costa Rica. I wasn't in the more touristy areas. There's so much fear. And when we go to these places, we realize they're people like us. And sure, they have a different government or a different way of operating, but they're people. And I just feel like there's so much fear around what we don't know. And the only way to overcome that is to go. I've been to the Democratic Republic of Congo, which again, people said, you're crazy for going in there. We went as part of a I went with 1 million thumbprints, and we went into Congo for a week. We had to walk in from Rwanda. So we flew into Rwanda and walked in because you really can't fly into Congo, and met with women and pastors in Congo. And then we went and climbed Kilimanjaro after as the fundraising arm for women who are in the three most dangerous places in the world to be a woman, which is Syria, South Sudan, and Congo. And I mean, that, yes, that to me did feel a little bit riskier, but am I so glad I did it? Yes. When I get to the end of my life, because that was a hard decision for me. Should I go into Congo? And I wasn't taking my kids, it was just me with this group of women. And I'm so glad I said yes. I am so glad. But I would say other places I've been that really moved me. One was Antigua, Guatemala on Easter. If you ever get a chance to go to Antigua, Guatemala on Easter, you have to go. It is like no other place, I'm convinced, on Easter. They have these alfombras, they're called. They call them rugs in Spanish, but basically they create these unbelievable artistic masterpieces with colors, and they work on them for months, it feels like. I mean, I don't know how long it takes them, but it has to take them a really long time. And they're all across the city. They have these rituals they do where the men are in suits and they carry these gigantic beams and these crosses. And they also carry different scenes of Jesus, and they are sweating. Some of them are crying. I mean, it is so moving. It is very moving. So that's another one I'd say really stands out. And I have to mention the Lauterbrunnen Valley in Switzerland and the Dolomites in Italy, because they're mountains, and I'm a Pacific Northwest girl, and the mountains just speak to me. And those two places have to be two of the most spectacular places in the world, mountainous regions in the world.
Okay, so I know you went on that trip recently, and tell us a little bit about that, because that one you did take some of your boys with you, and it was a really special family trip. Why did you choose that part of Italy and then Switzerland as well?
Well, Switzerland, I have a special place for because I studied there. And that's actually my husband and I fell in love traveling. So we went to the same college, and he was coming over to spend a summer in Spain. And I was just finishing up my semester in Switzerland. And we met up, and he wanted to see, well, he's a mountain climber, and he wanted to see the different mountainous regions. And I was in a place called Les Inns, Switzerland, which is small, and it's kind of above Montreux in Switzerland, this little Alp town. And so he's like, "Oh, you're in the mountains. I'm going to come see you and stay in that area." So anyway, we fell in love in Switzerland, and so that also means something. That country has a special place in my heart because of that. So we wanted to take our kids back to Switzerland, and so we did actually. 2 summers ago, we took the whole family, and my kids at that point, my daughter had been in Madrid. She was living in Madrid. And so we met up and we all traveled. And that turned out to be our last trip before my son got married, of just our immediate family. And so that was really special because it was on that trip that he told everyone he was going to ask his then girlfriend to marry him. And we all cried over fondue. So I have this core memory, literally we're sitting in the restaurant, the Alps are in the background, and we're all sharing this beautiful fondue meal. And all of a sudden he tells us he's going to ask his girlfriend to marry him. And we're all just weeping, as we're dipping our little sticks into the fondue pot. So, again, right? Like that, just those moments are so treasured for me. But why did we choose the Dolomites? We chose the Dolomites because we love the mountains. I mean, most people go southern Italy and they're going to go to, the Amalfi Coast, which is stunning and beautiful. But for us, we were more drawn actually to northern Italy and to that region, which is a little less touristy as well than the Swiss Alps. So it's less people. And it definitely has a German influence. And there's a whole story. It's called South Tyrol, that whole area. And there's a whole story of Hitler and Mussolini, and when Hitler actually gifted Italy that northern part, I guess southern part of Austria, it was German. And so then, they were trying to integrate it into Italy. So it has a really textured history. And there was a lot of persecution of the German language. And so 60% of people in that region speak German, which I didn't know until we traveled there. So it's this mix of kind of this Bavarian culture, and then you've got the Italian culture, and they overlay each other. And so it's a really unique part of Italy, but just stunning. And my kids, what they loved about Italy was, I feel like they really got a sense of how the Italians, almost like no other people in the world, which I know you are fangirling about, but how they overlay art and food and wine and drink. They just have this incredible relationship with those three things. And so everything is so artistic in Italy, and so about the senses and about what you see and what you taste and what you hear, right? The music. And they just loved it. I mean, it was so fun to watch them light up as they really just, because we went on food tours, which I know we'll talk about, but we went on food tours and we were listening to these Italians talk about their culture and how they overlay these things. And they're just married. And that literally is what they say. They say food and wine, for example, are married. They can't be separated from one another. And then I would add art onto that, because everything they do, I mean, even the way the sommelier was talking about the wine, he goes into the vineyard, he scoops up the dirt with his hands and he smells it. And he says, I do not recommend or really feel like I know a wine until I've smelled and put my hands in the dirt that it was grown in. And I'm like, that's Italy. That is why Italy is Italy, because that is exactly what they do.
I love it. Well, and isn't that also the Bible? I mean, that's what Jesus did. Like, he would go and he would give all of these stories that were in the fields and touch the dirt and, draw in the sand and like sit at the table for the wedding and turn water into wine. I mean, that's just so much who he was about. And so I love that your kids, your family, that you've had that experience of a culture that you also just see the beauty. I mean, that's God's glory right there. It's experiencing it with all the senses, the art, the beauty, the goodness, the taste, the taste and seeing the glory of God. It's all there.
Yeah,
So
you are just preaching the glory of God when you're putting your fork around peachy pasta. Like that, just, that rustic homemade pasta in Italy. I mean, just thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord, for peachy pasta.
you cannot do anything but express gratitude to God when you are eating the homemade pasta. At least that's what I think.
It's so true.
Oh, my mouth is watering just thinking about it. I want to ask you this because part of travel, especially international travel, is planning. And I know you are a coach. I know you are strategic in the way that you approach the world and even helping other people kind of design their lives. So when you are going somewhere, say Italy, for example, you mentioned these food tours, like what are you looking for that and how do you do that? I mean, do you just search on the internet? Do you get a travel agent? Like, what's the part of it that helps to prepare you for that trip?
Yeah, that is a key piece. I mean, I really am about intentional living. And I think when we are using the resources, we are taking the time to go on a trip, whatever it is, it's important for us to really think through, what does success look like for me at the end of this trip?
Mm.
Because and that's, everyone's going to answer that question differently. And it depends on where you are in your life and who's going with you. But what does success look like for me for this particular trip in this particular time? And so with every trip, I ask that. And I ask that to my husband, and I ask that to my kids, and I ask that for whoever's going with us, because everyone has a different answer and we have to adapt our itinerary based on that answer. So that's where I really begin, because we have to know that, because you can have a whole trip and then all of a sudden your spouse is like, gosh, at the end, I don't feel rested, or I'm disappointed that this didn't happen. And you're like, what? I spent all of those hours of planning and all, so that's the last thing you want. And so really drilling down into that. And then secondly, from there, then I take those things of kind of what everyone values. And then I really plan the trip around that. And for me, food is a huge part of how I experience a culture. I mean, I don't buy tchotchkes when I'm abroad or in other even parts of the United States. I actually buy cookbooks. So that's my souvenir is I bring home a cookbook from that place, whatever it is. And so I love food tours. And so for me, getting to go to those hole in the wall bakeries or that little place, that little sandwich shop, that's what like gets me going. And so pretty much in every place we go, we sign up for a food tour, and I'll just research, what are the best food tours in the area? What are the places that I want to try? So, for example, in Rome, we did the Roscioli's food tour. The Roscioli's are kind of the iconic food family in Rome. In fact, in their cookbook, I was laughing so hard because they said the Roscioli's are from Rome. The Roscioli's are Rome. And I was like, okay, there you go. That's Italian confidence right there. So I looked into Rome and, what place I would want to in the city, what place would I want to do a food tour? And there were really two. And then I chose from there. And then in New York, we did a fantastic food tour. So every senior in our family gets to go on a trip that's tailored to their personality. And that's with the cousins too. And whoever can go goes. And one of my nephews, he's a jazz pianist. And so we went to New York and did a bunch of jazz stuff and jazz clubs. And it was so fun. Probably my favorite thing in New York was the food tour that we did. And that for me is a huge part of it, is because the food is a part of the place. And so that's a part of getting in touch with the place and the history of a place, because you will never go on a food tour and not hear all about the history. And that is so fun. Like when you're in New York and you're hearing about the history of the immigrants who brought that food to that area and how that restaurant started or how that deli started. I mean, it is just the coolest. And so you're getting kind of this historical as well as tasting, incredible food. And then you know where to go to eat the rest of the trip. And that's fantastic because you wouldn't necessarily find those places on your own.
That's amazing. I love that tip. And I think you're right. I mean, that's such a great way to enter into the local culture. I mean, of course, there's the tourist spots that we want to go to if we were going to go to a new city, if we're going to travel to another country across the world. But getting to have that kind of behind the scenes, the stories and the people who know the hole in the wall places like that, that's gold. I love that tip. And I love that you make that a priority when you travel.
Well, and one more thing I would say is, and I know that you can resonate with this as well, but we are big on getting out in the place and either hiking or walking or something where you are with your own feet, you are walking the land where you are, wherever it is, whether it's rural or city, because there is something different when we are outside. And for people that run, I mean, I used to do that. I mean, one of my core memories with my brother is when we were in southern Germany. And it's when I had studied abroad and my family came over to see me, same type of situation. And we were in Fussen, Germany, and we took a run up to the Neuschwanstein Castle, which is what Disney modeled their castle after, at sunset. And we were running through the German, Bavaria trails, and we ended up at sunset on the castle. And it was like, it's one of my favorite memories with my brother. And so, but really getting out and being in the place with your physical body and walking around and seeing it, there's really nothing that replaces that either.
Oh, that's so good. You know what? Actually, that is what my husband does. Anytime we go to a new city or a new place, Sean always makes time to go for a run. His goal is really that, to check out the neighborhood. And, a lot of times he and I will go together. In fact, that's kind of what we do for our anniversary trips that we've made a tradition, is that wherever we go, whether that's Rome or Catalina Island or, somewhere in the Midwest, that we'll go out on a run together. Inevitably, it's like that. There's like a sunset or there's just some landscape that we see and it just becomes that memory.
Totally. I'm with them on that.
I love it. Well, I'm going to ask you kind of a fun and practical question. Do you have any favorite items that you love to bring with you when you travel?
Yes, I could not go on a trip without my Hokas and my Dr. Scholl's sneakers.
Okay. So those
those
are
are
your
my
two.
those are my two. I mean, the Hokas are just amazing, and I'm a total convert to Hoka. I love them. But also the Dr. Scholl's, now they make them so they actually look cute, like they don't look like grandma's shoes.
Yeah.
But when you are walking 9 to 15 miles a day, because I mean, this is what you do when you go to Madrid or you go to New York or whatever, you are walking everywhere and you have to have comfortable shoes on or you won't enjoy it. And the whole point of your trip is to enjoy it. And so, I mean, one of my biggest recommendations to people is get good shoes. You have to be comfortable in the shoes that you're in when you're traveling. And what's great about the sneaker fashion these days is that sneakers literally can go with anything. Everyone's wearing sneakers. Brides are wearing sneakers. Get good sneakers, and Dr. Scholl's are really comfortable for travels. I would definitely recommend those. I would also say just a good crossbody. And when I'm in Europe, especially in places like Italy, they are next level when it comes to fashion. I mean, they dress up. Same with Madrid. I mean, same with, any of the European cities, they take it up a notch, and you don't want to look so casual and American all the time. So I would say just a good crossbody that's casual for some places. And then also you can go on Nordstrom Rack and look at their crossbody bags and even find a more like dressed up one. And I get one with a metal chain on it so that it can't be cut. And so that's what I actually use in the cities, because you do want to blend in a little more and you don't want to look totally American. And so even though we're proud of it. But so that's actually a tip that I have is go to Nordstrom Rack and get a fun crossbody, nice bag, especially for cities. And then I would also say that you can dress up in that vein. You can dress up your outfits a little bit with bringing some good jewelry, even if you've just got basics that you're traveling with, because you're trying to travel light. But you can dress up your outfit with a scarf or a bag. Even tying that scarf on your bag is cute, and so that's great. I have a bag. I can send you the link, but that folds down into a tiny pouch. I mean, literally, it folds into like just a little square, but it opens up into this really big bag. So I bring that every time I travel. And then the other thing I do bring is I bring little individual servings of super greens, of collagen, of liquid IVs. And so wherever I go, if I just need some quick protein, because half the time you can't find food when you want it, or you're not in a place where you can get to it.
Totally.
So just bringing those individual packs of protein, that's key for me, is having just a whole stash of those in my bag so that we can grab those. Or like beef jerky, I tend to bring a lot of like beef jerky or
Chomps.
chomps. Chomps is the word I'm looking for. I bring chomps, bring beef jerky, and then I really like that clean and simple protein. So that's a brand that I found, and they have individual packs of everything. And so I just order stuff from them, and then I have it in my bag.
Okay, those are some pro tips. We are definitely going to share those links in the show notes. Krista is an experienced traveler. So I'm like, okay, where's my Amazon cart right now? And you guys turned me on to the chomps. I love the little fashion tips too, because especially like traveling in Europe and some of those places. We got to kick it up a notch. Can't just be in our nerdy American t-shirts and cutoffs, right? What we wear in California. Well, Krista, okay, this is my last question I love to ask all my guests. If you could go anywhere in the world, money wasn't an object, where would it be, and why would you choose that place?
Yeah, my husband and I talk about this, especially now that we have a little more freedom than we have before.
Yeah.
So Patagonia is on our list at some point. We really want to go to Patagonia, Argentina, and New Zealand. I would say those are the two that we're excited about these days.
Oh, my daughter would be like in your backpack in a second. Those are two that are on her like top 5 list. That's so funny. That's fantastic.
Where would you go, Dorina?
Well, oh gosh, there's so many places, but top of my list, if I really, could take the whole family outside of Italy, which we are going to go to Italy this summer with my parents on a special heritage tour. But I would like to go to the Philippines. So my
Mm,
dad's family is from the Philippines. I've actually never been there. And I would love to take my whole family just to be able to see the islands where he grew up and all these stories that I've heard from my aunties and uncles through the years. That would be an epic trip. But it's an
mm.
epically long trip and a
Yeah.
big one to pay for. So that's on the bucket list.
Mhm. I'd love to go there too. So good.
Well, Krista, thank you so much for your time today. This has been so fun. I'm sure we could dish about food and travel for a couple more hours here. I just want to say thank you for being here and just for the inspiration that you've been, just giving us some of those practical tips, but also that deeper why of why travel is important and how we can connect with God through that. So thanks for your time.
Hmm. Thank you, Dorina. I love, love, love talking about this with you.
Well, friends, for today's Global Glory Chasers recommendations, we actually are going to take the ones that Krista mentioned in the broadcast, and you can check out those links in the show notes. I want to also share with you a little piece of writing from Krista's Instagram. I love following her on Instagram. She is a wonderful coach and also shares so much about food and travel. And she wrote this in one of her posts. It's called Why I Travel. She says, I've slept in a tent at 15,000 feet in Africa and in an open air room with a mosquito net, a dirt floor, and a tin roof. I've dined on a 5-course meal in a chateau in France, shared fondue with strangers in Switzerland, backcountry skied into a tiny historic lodge in Canada, and rolled pasta in Italy. I've cried with loneliness when spending a year abroad in a country where I couldn't speak the language. I've been a passenger in an SUV guarded on both sides by UN peacekeeper tanks. I've killed a tarantula with my shoe, cooked for a crowd on a camp stove on a medical mission trip, and paraglided through the most beautiful valley in the world. Whatever the circumstance, whether traveling in comfortable situations or facing unnerving or unknown destinations, travel has always unlocked growth and discovery. I have never regretted stepping outside my comfort zone, not once. Travel brings me to life, sparking my creativity and curiosity in countless ways. It builds self confidence and self efficacy. It makes my world bigger and my life richer. It gives me fresh eyes for my own home and culture and transforms me into a slightly different, more free person than I was before. John O'Donohue once wrote, May you travel in an awakened way, gathered wisely into your inner ground, that you may not waste the invitations which wait along the way to transform you. This is why I travel. And this is why I bring my children with me. And my hope is that they too will discover the gold that awaits them as they stretch to unlock the hidden treasures that lie in unknown places. So, how about you? Why do you travel? Well, friends, those are words from my dear friend, Krista Gilbert, who we got to interview in today's show. Thank you for joining us for season 5, episode 8 of the Global Glory Chasers podcast, which is made possible and ad free by generous supporters through Substack. So you can hop over to Substack and subscribe to my free weekly Glorygram newsletter. It includes an essay, lots of fun details about my travels and chasing God's glory, as well as recommendations. And you can also choose to become a paid subscriber to support the podcast. Details are at Dorina glorygramsubstack.com. And we will be right back here next Wednesday to drop our next episode of the Global Glory Chasers. Friends, let's keep chasing God's glory together.